On the morning of the most important interview of his life, a young black man steps out in his best shirt, carrying not just a portfolio, but also his mother's hopes, his childhood, and every unspoken promise he's ever made to himself. But when a storm suddenly rolls in, and he sees an old man stranded on the side of the road, he makes a choice to stop and help, knowing that doing so could cost him the opportunity he's worked so hard to achieve. What he doesn't know is that this act of kindness is about to change his life in ways he never imagined. This isn't just a story about ambition. It's about what happens when doing the right thing opens the right door. Don't skip this one. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow, I've got something extra special for you. The sky over Southbridge looked ready to collapse under its own weight that morning, thick with the kind of gray that warns you trouble is coming. And in the middle of that early gloom stood Henry Shawn, 26 years old, shoulders squared, clutching the strap of a worn navy blue bag he'd polished the night before as if polish alone could rewrite a man's future. He didn't know it yet, but the next hour would change everything. Not in the way he hoped. Not in the way anyone would choose. But in the way life sometimes works, quietly, harshly, and with a strange sense of timing. Before we go deeper into Henry's story, if you're listening right now, let us know where you're watching from. Because stories like his, they hit different depending on where you're standing. Henry lived in a neighborhood most people only whispered about, a place where opportunity felt like a rumor and success was something you admired from far away. But this morning, 6:42 a.m., shirt carefully pressed, tie knotted 3 times until it sat just right, Henry believed he had a real chance. A chance to step into the lobby of Whitmore and Blake Financial Group, shake someone's hand, and prove he belonged in a world that had never once opened its doors for him. He had worked for this moment. Sacrificed for it. Everything in his life was riding on an 8 a.m. interview. What he didn't realize was that life had already placed a crossroads in his path, one that would ask him to choose between ambition and the kind of person he refused to stop being, no matter how many times the world tried to teach him otherwise. Within an hour, Henry Shawn would miss the most important appointment of his life. And yet, that single missed moment would become the doorway to everything he once believed was out of his reach. The morning of his greatest setback was also the morning his story truly began. Henry stepped off his porch and locked the door behind him, slipping the key into his pocket the way he always did, twice, for luck. The hallway light in his building had burned out months ago, but he knew the steps by heart. He'd climbed them since he was 12, carrying groceries for his mother or balancing a stack of textbooks he never complained about even when other kids teased him for trying too hard. He walked briskly through the courtyard of the apartment complex, the faint smell of damp concrete rising as the first drops of rain touched the ground. A few neighbors nodded at him. They'd seen him growing up. They knew his mother, Patricia, a nurse's aide who worked night shifts and still managed to send him texts every morning. Today's text had come in at 6:15 a.m. Remember who you are. Don't shrink for anybody. I love you. He'd read it twice while buttoning his shirt, the same way he read all her morning texts, as if her words could give his shoulders just a little more strength. Henry had been raised on lessons, not lectures. Patricia believed in showing rather than telling, so Henry grew up watching her come home bone-tired but still stopping to help someone with their bags or give her last $5 to a neighbor whose lights had been cut off. She never bragged. She never explained. She just did what she believed was right, and Henry absorbed it the way a seed absorbs rain. But life didn't reward him the way it should have. College advisors didn't quite see him. Hiring managers sometimes didn't hear him. People on the street crossed to the other side when he approached at night. Even today, he was aware of the looks, tight, measuring glances, the automatic guardedness that flickered in certain people's eyes when they saw a young black man moving quickly with a bag in his hand. He carried himself gently because he'd learned long ago that the world misread him before he ever spoke. Still, he had dreams large enough to steady him. What he wanted, more than money, more than status, was a place where he could grow. A desk. A badge with his name on it. A seat at a table where decisions were made instead of survived. A place where he could prove to himself, not anyone else, that the limits placed on him weren't his boundaries, only other people's expectations. The interview at Whitmore and Blake was the doorway to that world. Even being invited shocked him. He'd sent out 32 applications over the last 3 months. Most were ignored. A few came back with automated rejections. But last Wednesday, at 11:03 a.m., after he'd stepped out of a temporary warehouse shift, his phone buzzed with an email. "We would like to schedule an interview with you for the junior analyst position." He'd almost dropped the phone. He'd stood in the alley behind the warehouse, sweaty and tired and smelling faintly of cardboard dust, rereading the email until the words blurred. Now, walking toward the bus stop, his shoes tapping the uneven sidewalk, Henry kept replaying his practice answers. Why finance? Why this firm? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? But underneath the rehearsed lines was something quieter, deeper, his real fear. Will they see past where I come from? Will they see me at all? He tugged his sleeves straight. The shirt was slightly tight around the shoulders. He'd bought it for $8 from a clearance rack, and the fabric pulled if he lifted his arms too high, but it was clean, ironed, and it made him feel like the man he knew he could be. At the corner, the bus sign rattled in the growing wind. Henry checked the time, 6:58 a.m. He had plenty of minutes to spare. Enough to breathe. Enough to picture himself walking into a glass tower built for people who had never walked the cracked streets he was crossing now. He didn't know that before this day ended, he would walk into a tower like that, just not in the way he imagined. But for now, he simply waited at the bus stop, hopeful, nervous, unaware that life was already shifting beneath his feet like the first tremor of a coming storm. The bus arrived with a long metal sigh, its brakes hissing as if exhausted from fighting morning traffic. Henry stepped on, nodding at the driver, who barely looked up. The interior smelled faintly of damp coats and yesterday's spilled coffee, the kind of scent that clung to public transit long after the source had vanished. He moved down the aisle and took a seat near the back, placing his bag carefully on his lap. Through the fogged windows, Southbridge shifted past him, brick buildings with peeling paint, corner stores with flickering neon signs, murals faded by seasons of rain and sun. A dog trotted across the street dragging a torn plastic bag, and an older woman in a lavender scarf stood under a narrow awning, waiting for a bus that always came later than the schedule promised. This was Henry's world. A place stitched together with resilience and thin margins. A place where people checked their pockets before stepping outside, not out of paranoia but habit. Where children played basketball with a rim missing one bolt. Where sirens were as common as laughter. The bus turned north, and slowly, the city began to change. The building stretched taller. Windows gleamed. Car dealerships appeared, shiny rows of sedans reflecting the dull morning light. The sidewalks widened. Coffee shops with minimalist signs replaced liquor stores with metal shutters. The air itself seemed different, as if it carried more permission for people to breathe easily. Henry always noticed the shift. The transit map pinned near the driver might have shown a single continuous route, but to Henry, it felt like crossing a border, one enforced not by laws but by expectations. In Southbridge, people walked quickly with their heads down. Here, people walked like the world belonged to them. As the bus rolled closer to the downtown district, glass towers began to rise, not gradually but suddenly, great mirror giants stretching into the clouds. Whitmore and Blake Financial Group sat among them somewhere, 82 floors of polished ambition, a place where decisions moved markets and careers were sculpted behind closed doors. Henry looked out at the skyscrapers and felt his throat tighten, not with fear, but with a kind of awe mixed with longing. He imagined the offices inside, spotless floors, soft humming lights, the tap of expensive shoes on marble. Nothing in Southbridge prepared you for that level of shine. Even the air near downtown smelled different, less like exhaust, more like cold steel and fresh rain. But the sky was shifting. Dark clouds pressed lower, heavy and impatient. The wind picked up, rattling traffic signs and bending the tops of young trees lining the sidewalks. The city seemed to brace itself, as if aware of the storm rolling toward it. Somewhere between neighborhoods, the bus slowed, briefly stalled by a growing line of cars and honking horns. Henry checked his watch. 7:14 a.m. He exhaled slowly. Still on schedule. Still enough time to cross the plaza, ride the elevator, and steady himself before the interview. But the closer the bus crept downtown, the more the storm's presence tightened its grip. A few raindrops splattered against the window, big, heavy drops that hit with the sound of tiny drumbeats. People outside hurried their pace, tilting umbrellas upward, hunching their shoulders against the gathering wind. By the time Henry stepped off the bus at his stop, a faint drizzle coated the sidewalks, the kind that gave everything a slick shine. He looked up at the towering skyline. The buildings glimmered in the dim light, reflecting the darkening sky like a row of judgmental eyes. The contrast between where Henry came from and where he was walking now stretched wide and unmistakable, two worlds touching only in the space where a young man like him stepped forward, hoping he belonged. He tightened his grip on his bag and hurried toward the crosswalk. The storm was just beginning. And so were the obstacles waiting for him. Henry tightened his pace as the drizzle turned into a steady tap against the pavement. He crossed the wide intersection leading toward the financial district, stepping around puddles that reflected the towering glass buildings above him. His shoes were already damp at the edges, but he ignored the discomfort. He had one mission: get to the interview on time. He checked his watch again. 7:19 a.m. Still good. Still manageable. He'd mapped it all out the night before. The bus schedule. The walking time. Even the expected wait for the elevator. But storms have a way of rewriting plans without apology. A gust of wind hit him hard enough to make him take half a step back. The rain thickened, no longer a drizzle but a determined assault. People around him rushed for shelter, men in tailored suits ducking under overhangs, women holding sleek black umbrellas that flipped inside out with sudden gusts. Henry wished he had one too, but umbrellas were luxuries he usually skipped in favor of necessities. He tried to walk faster, but the first obstacle appeared before he even realized what was happening. Up ahead, a yellow taxi slowed at the curb, its available light glowing like a promise. Henry lifted his hand, hopeful. The driver spotted him and began pulling closer. For a second, relief washed over him. Then a sharply dressed man in a charcoal gray suit stepped directly in front of Henry, yanked the taxi door open, and slid inside without hesitation. The driver didn't even glance Henry's way. The taxi sped off, spraying a wave of rainwater across Henry's pant leg. He stumbled back, jaw clenched, feeling cold water creep into his socks. The man hadn't looked at him. Not once. That kind of dismissal carried its own sting, sharp and familiar. Henry had experienced moments like that before, subtle, but heavy in their meaning. A silent suggestion about who belonged and who didn't. He inhaled slowly, letting the breath settle the tightness building in his chest. 7:23 a.m. He couldn't waste time being angry. He wiped his pant leg with a shaky hand and kept moving. 2 blocks ahead, the sound of rushing water grew louder. Henry rounded the corner and saw why: half the street was already flooding. The storm drains couldn't keep up. Cars moved cautiously, their tires slicing through water that reached nearly halfway up their rims. He spotted a cluster of commuters waiting under the covered entrance of a coffee shop. A digital sign beside the building scrolled bus updates. Henry stepped closer, squinting through the rain. Red line shut down, flooding on track. Expect delays across all routes. Use alternate transportation. Alternate transportation. Right. As if he had any. People around him groaned. Several tapped furiously on their screens, summoning rideshares with effortless entitlement. Henry checked his phone. His banking app balance blinked back at him, enough for groceries, maybe enough for transit, but not enough for a surge-priced ride when the city was drowning in rain. He swallowed hard. The storm beat down harder, large drops smacking the pavement like thrown pebbles. 7:27 a.m. The interview was less than 40 minutes away. Normally, he could jog from here and make it in time, but in weather like this? Every second felt slippery, sliding out of his control. Water soaked into his collar, trickled down his back. His shirt clung to his skin, turning the crisp fabric heavy and wrinkled. He imagined stepping into an office like Whitmore and Blake looking like this, and his stomach twisted. But he pushed forward, stepping into the rain, refusing to stop. Cars hissed past, sending waves of cold water across the sidewalks. The wind stung against his cheeks. His sleeves hung heavier with every step. He kept checking the time, each glance quick and anxious. 7:31 a.m. 7:33 a.m. Downtown shimmered ahead like a world just out of reach, tall, glass, perfect, while Henry moved through the storm like someone fighting invisible currents. The rain blurred his vision, but he kept walking, one careful step after another, determined not to slip, determined not to lose the opportunity he'd waited months for. Yet even as he pushed through the worsening weather, something in the distance waited for him, something small, something unexpected, something that would test him more deeply than the storm ever could. He wasn't late yet. But the moment that would change everything was getting closer with every step. The rain no longer fell in drops, it hammered down in sheets, blurring the edges of buildings until the whole city looked like it was dissolving. Henry's shirt clung to him like a second skin, and each step sent a small splash around his shoes. He didn't bother checking his phone anymore, the screen was too wet to respond. He kept moving, half running, half sliding through the storm. The fastest route to Whitmore and Blake led through a pedestrian underpass beneath the train tracks. Henry hurried toward it, head lowered against the wind, only to stop short when he reached the entrance. The entire underpass had transformed into a rushing, murky river. Water surged in from one end and poured out the other, swirling with debris, paper cups, branches, a floating plastic bag dancing on the surface like a ghost. The water was easily knee-high, maybe worse in the center. Crossing it would ruin what was left of his clothes and possibly his phone, but detouring around it would cost precious minutes he didn't have. A few other commuters stood nearby, staring in frustration. One man in a slim tailored coat shook his head and muttered, "Unbelievable," before turning away, already dialing someone to come pick him up. Another woman sighed and started typing angrily on her phone. Henry stood there for a moment, the rain pounding hard against his shoulders. 7:35 a.m. He did the math quickly. If he sprinted 3 blocks around the underpass, he'd still make it. Barely. If he tried wading through, he might lose his phone, his bag, and half his dignity before even arriving. He backed away, took a breath, and chose the detour. He turned the corner and started running. Water sloshed into his shoes. His socks squished. His tie slapped wetly against his chest. His breath grew ragged as he sprinted through puddles that reached mid-shin. People noticed him, some stepping aside, others giving him that quick, guarded glance, the one that suggested a young black man running meant danger, not desperation. He felt those looks. He always felt them. But he didn't let them slow him. He kept going. By the time Henry reached the plaza outside Whitmore and Blake, he was drenched, exhausted, and breathing hard. The building rose above him like a glass fortress, its mirrored surface reflecting the storm in eerie, fractured patterns. 7:41 a.m. If he could just get upstairs, just explain the situation, maybe, just maybe, someone would understand. He jogged across the slick plaza toward the revolving door. Another man approached at the same time, a tall, clean-shaven executive type with an umbrella tucked under one arm and a leather briefcase in hand. They reached the door almost simultaneously. Henry gestured for him to go ahead. It was habit. Politeness. Respect. But the man's eyes locked onto him for a split second, taking in the soaked clothes, the running, the neighborhood ingrained subtly into Henry's posture, and something tightened in the man's expression. Not anger. Not fear. Just that small, familiar judgment. A quick calculation of worth. Henry stepped forward to enter behind him, but the man sped up, pushing the door faster, forcing Henry to lose his chance. The glass panels swung around, leaving Henry on the outside, forced to wait a full rotation while the man disappeared inside without looking back. By the time Henry managed to push through, he felt the weight of the morning settle in his chest. Not just the storm. Not just the obstacles. But the 1,000 tiny ways the world reminded him who it believed he was. He shook off as much water as he could and stepped into the marble lobby, the floor gleaming beneath his soaked shoes. 7:43 a.m. A few minutes late, but still close enough. He straightened his posture, lifted his chin, and started toward the elevator bank, unaware that something far more important than an interview was waiting for him just outside, only a block away. Because while he'd been running toward opportunity, fate had been waiting with a different kind of test. One that looked nothing like the challenges he'd trained for. One that would require not his skills, but his character. Henry rounded the corner and almost ran into him. An elderly man, white-haired and hunched, was struggling with a flat tire on the side of the street. The rain pelted down in sheets, drenching him as he fumbled with the lug wrench, shivering under a soaked overcoat. Henry froze for a fraction of a second. His mind screamed, interview. Whitmore and Blake. This is it. If I stop now, I might never get this chance. But then another thought surfaced, one he couldn't ignore. Mom's voice. Character is what you do when no one's watching, Henry. Always choose what's right, even if it costs you. He remembered the countless mornings she had pushed him out the door with love and quiet lessons, reminding him that integrity wasn't measured by success, but by the choices you made in unobserved moments. Henry looked at the man again. The rain was relentless, and the old man's hands were trembling. A passing car splashed a wave of water at them both. The man cursed softly under his breath and dropped the wrench. Henry's gut tightened. The interview. His future. Everything he had been working toward. And yet, he couldn't just walk by. Not this time. He ran forward. Sir. Do you need some help? He shouted over the rain. The man looked up, startled, embarrassed, but nodded gratefully. Yes, please. Henry dropped his bag to the sidewalk and waded into the mud and puddles. His sleeves were soaked through, his tie plastered to his chest, but he didn't care. He gripped the wrench, positioned the jack under the car, and worked steadily. Each turn of the wrench felt heavier than the last, not just because of the tire, but because he knew what this was costing him. Every second spent here was a second further from the elevator lobby, further from the chance he had been counting on for months. But with every tightening lug nut, every soaked breath, Henry felt something else. A strange, quiet affirmation that he was doing what he was supposed to do. That some victories were invisible. Some tests never had witnesses. By the time the tire was secured and the man carefully lifted the car from the jack, Henry was soaked, cold, and exhausted. His shoes squelched with every step, and his bag dripped rainwater onto the sidewalk. The man straightened, patting Henry's shoulder. Thank you, son. I don't know what I would have done without you. Henry smiled weakly, shivering. It's nothing, just glad I could help. He glanced at his watch. 7:55 a.m. The interview was still minutes away. If he ran, he might make it, but he knew, deep down, it was too late. He had chosen integrity over opportunity. He had chosen to help someone in need, even at the cost of his most important goal. And in that choice, the weight of disappointment hit him like the rain itself, cold and relentless. Henry took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and started walking toward the office anyway, wet, tired, and fully aware that the consequences of doing the right thing were about to catch up with him. Henry ran the last few blocks toward Whitmore and Blake, but every step felt heavier than the one before. His shoes squelched through puddles, his tie hung like a wet rope across his chest, and his bag swung awkwardly at his side, dripping water onto the polished sidewalks. The sky above opened further, rain lashing down in sheets as if mocking his urgency. He reached the revolving doors and pushed through, water sliding off his shoulders. The marble lobby gleamed under bright overhead lights, a stark contrast to the cracked sidewalks and puddles he had just crossed. He drew a shaky breath and stepped forward toward the receptionist. I'm here for my interview with Mr. Whitmore, he said, voice tight, dripping water onto the marble floor. The receptionist glanced at her watch, then back at him, her expression polite but distant. I'm sorry, she said, tapping the screen in front of her. Mr. Whitmore has already moved on to the next candidate. You're late. Henry's chest tightened. His hands gripped his dripping bag as if holding on to hope itself. There was. I'm sorry, she repeated, firm but not unkind. There's nothing I can do. He nodded slowly, swallowing the frustration and the sting of disappointment. He left the water-drenched resume on the counter and stepped back into the lobby, shoulders slumped. Each breath felt heavier, every heartbeat echoing the words he couldn't take back, too late. Outside, the rain showed no mercy. Henry wiped his face with the back of his hand, water and regret running together. He had chosen to stop and help someone in need, and now he was paying the price in the only currency the world seemed to value: timeliness, efficiency, and appearances. He walked away from the lobby slowly, leaving the skyscraper behind like a dream he couldn't reach today. The storm soaked through his clothes, but even through the cold and the exhaustion, something deep inside refused to break. He hadn't cheated. He hadn't compromised. He had done what he believed was right, even when it cost him the thing he wanted most. Henry's mind drifted briefly to his mother's words, a small warmth in the midst of the storm. Character is what you do when no one's watching. Never forget that, Henry. The rain ran down his face as he headed toward the street, silent and soaked, carrying a quiet dignity in defeat that no skyscraper, no interview, and no storm could take from him. And somewhere in that moment, in the mix of cold water and disappointment, the seed of something unexpected began to grow, a hint that life sometimes rewards in ways that patience, integrity, and courage can reveal, long after the apparent loss. Henry trudged through the wet streets, each step sending water squelching from his shoes. The city around him seemed indifferent, cars splashing past, umbrellas bobbing through the drizzle, office workers hurrying to meetings he would never attend today. The world went on without pause, and for the first time, he felt the full weight of being invisible in a place that measured value by punctuality and polish. By the time he reached Southbridge, his clothes were plastered to his frame, his tie twisted and sodden, and his hair dripping down his forehead. He unlocked the door to his apartment and stepped inside, letting the warmth of the small space wash over him. The familiar scent of worn carpet and lingering coffee offered a quiet comfort, though it did little to ease the ache of disappointment. He sat on the edge of his bed, pulling off his wet shoes and staring at the floor. The day that had promised so much had slipped through his fingers, and the bitter truth settled in: sometimes, doing the right thing cost more than anyone anticipated. Yet, as he sat there, Henry couldn't bring himself to regret the choice he had made. He replayed the scene with the elderly man, the way his hands trembled, the grateful nod, the simple words of thanks. Every drop of rain, every cold, aching muscle, every wet sleeve had mattered. And in that moment, he realized something subtle but profound: the world didn't have to notice his integrity for it to hold meaning. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from his mother lit the screen. "No matter what today looks like, I'm proud of you. You did the right thing. That's the only thing that lasts." Henry smiled faintly, pressing his thumb against the screen. Her words grounded him. They reminded him that life wasn't only about what the world measured, it was also about the quiet victories, the choices made when no one else was watching, the character that carried you through storms, literal and figurative. He leaned back against the headboard and closed his eyes. The rain continued outside, tapping gently against the window, but inside, there was a strange calm. His disappointment hadn't vanished, but it had shifted into something else, a quiet affirmation that he had acted in alignment with who he wanted to be. For the first time that day, Henry let himself breathe fully, knowing that while he had lost the immediate prize, he had not lost himself. He sat there, soaked, exhausted, yet resolute, and thought about what tomorrow might bring. Even in defeat, a seed of hope had been planted. And though he couldn't see it yet, the choices he made in the unobserved moments, the ones that cost him dearly today, were already shaping the future in ways he could not imagine. The storm would pass. And Henry Shawn, as he sat in the quiet of his apartment, knew he would endure it, and more importantly, he would continue to do what was right, no matter the cost. Henry was halfway through peeling off his wet shirt when his phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen and froze. The number was unfamiliar, and the display read, "Charlotte Quinn, Whitmore and Blake." His thumb hovered over the screen, heart hammering. "Hello?" he said cautiously, voice still rough from the cold and rain. "Mr. Sean," a crisp, professional voice answered. "This is Charlotte Quinn, executive assistant to Mr. Liam Whitmore, the CEO. I understand you missed your interview yesterday due to unforeseen circumstances. Mr. Whitmore has reviewed the situation and would like to meet with you, today, if possible, on the 82nd floor of our downtown office." Henry blinked. The words didn't register at first. The 82nd floor, he repeated, his mind racing. Yes, I can come." Charlotte gave him the details quickly, her voice measured and efficient. Henry hung up, staring at the phone as if it were a portal to another world. He couldn't process it. After yesterday, after the storm, the missed interview, the dripping suit and soaked shoes, he had expected nothing. Rejection, maybe silence, certainly disappointment. But now, a second chance? And not just a second chance, an audience with the CEO himself. Henry dressed quickly, still damp but energized by a strange, trembling hope. Every step toward the elevator felt surreal. He clutched his bag, feeling the weight of yesterday's rainwater still trapped inside, and wondered how the universe could twist so sharply from defeat to opportunity. When he arrived downtown, the lobby seemed impossibly large, impossibly clean, the kind of place he had imagined in dreams. The elevators glided silently upward, each floor passing like a countdown. 82, the doors slid open, revealing a long hallway lined with polished wood and muted light. At the end of the corridor, a man waited. Older, dignified, his white hair neatly combed, eyes sharp but not unkind. Henry's stomach twisted as recognition struck. This was the man he had helped yesterday, the elderly gentleman struggling with a flat tire in the rain. The same man whose gratitude had cost him the interview. "Mr. Sean," the man said, voice steady but warm. "Thank you for helping me yesterday." Henry froze, realization washing over him. You're Mr. Whitmore?" Whitmore nodded, a faint smile forming. "Yes. I never introduced myself properly on the street, but that doesn't diminish the importance of what you did. Most people would have kept walking, especially with their own ambitions pressing. But you didn't. You stopped. You helped." Henry's mouth went dry. I didn't know it was you." Whitmore held up a hand. "It doesn't matter. What matters is your choice. What matters is character. What you demonstrated yesterday, without anyone watching, is exactly the quality we value here." Henry's chest tightened. The disappointment of yesterday collided with the revelation of today. The rain-soaked, exhausting, morally costly hours he had endured had not gone unnoticed. For the first time, the stakes of integrity and moral courage became tangible, standing before him in the man whose respect mattered more than any interview, any job posting, or any title. Henry realized, in that moment, that the true test of success had never been about being on time, being polished, or making the perfect impression. It had always been about who he chose to be when no one else was watching. And now, the universe was showing him that sometimes, the right choice carries its own reward, unexpected, transformative, and entirely unearned by conventional standards. Henry followed Mr. Whitmore into a smaller office off the main hallway. The space was warm, lined with shelves of books, awards from decades past, and photographs of people and places Henry couldn't yet recognize. The faint scent of polished wood and leather hung in the air, a subtle reminder of the world he had long dreamed of entering. Whitmore gestured toward a chair. "Please, sit," he said. His voice was calm but carried a weight that made Henry feel both nervous and at ease. "I want to tell you something, Henry," Whitmore began. "I've spent my life building companies, analyzing numbers, navigating markets. I can teach anyone the skills to succeed in finance. But there is one thing no one can teach: integrity. The courage to act rightly when no one is watching. That is revealed through choices, small and unseen." Henry's hands tightened in his lap. He remembered the rain, the old man struggling with the flat tire, the wet sleeve against his skin, the seconds slipping away from his interview. Every small decision, every quiet act, seemed suddenly monumental. Whitmore continued, "Yesterday, you could have kept walking. You could have gone to your interview and been on time, polished and ready. Most would. But you didn't. You stopped. You helped. And in that moment, you revealed something far more important than skill or resume credentials. You revealed who you are." Henry shook his head in disbelief. I didn't know it was you. I did what felt right." Whitmore smiled. "Exactly. And that is precisely why I want you to work with me. Not as a junior analyst. Not in a role predefined by titles. I want you as my special assistant, a mentorship position. You will learn, observe, and grow directly alongside me. Skills can be taught, Henry. Character cannot. You've already proven yours." Henry's heart raced. "Why me?" he whispered. Why would you choose me?" Whitmore leaned back, eyes steady. "Because someone once believed in me before I deserved it. I am paying it forward. You have shown that even when the world looks the other way, even when doing the right thing costs you, integrity matters. That is far more valuable than any resume, any interview, any credential." The word settled over Henry like sunlight breaking through a storm. All the cold, all the rain, all the missed opportunities, they hadn't been wasted. They had shaped him, prepared him, and revealed to the one person whose respect could redefine his path what he was truly capable of. He took a deep breath, feeling it fill him from chest to head, soaking him with a new confidence. I won't let you down," he said quietly. Whitmore's smile deepened. "I know you won't. And more importantly, you'll carry this forward. You'll see opportunities not just for yourself, but for others. You'll help someone the way someone helped me. That is the true measure of success." Henry looked out the office window. Below, the city shimmered, wet streets reflecting the morning sun as the storm finally passed. He realized then that the rainstorm, the chaos, the obstacles, the sacrifice, had revealed his chance. Not just a job, but a future built on integrity, resilience, and unseen courage. He straightened his shoulders, a quiet smile forming. This was more than an opportunity. It was affirmation. The kind that comes not from being seen, but from choosing right when no one else was watching. And Henry Shawn, wet, weary, but unwavering, finally understood the lesson the storm had taught him. The right choice may cost you everything in the moment, but it can also give you everything in the long run. He turned to Whitmore, nodding with the calm certainty of someone who had survived the storm and now stepped into the sunshine. This was his moment. And he would not waste it. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.